Welcome everybody to our webinar. It is Wednesday the 30th of June. I'm really excited to be here today and to welcome Professor Pamela Hinds, who's joining us here from Stanford Online, and also Koichiro or Corey Kondo, who will be joining us a little bit later on from Dentsu. And we're here to talk a little bit about mastering the keys of a successful digital transformation. Now, of course, one of the ironies of that is that we're doing this using technology. So we're going to spend just a couple of moments thinking about how this works. So one of the very first things that I want to draw your attention to is that over on the right-hand side of your screen, you should see a panel which offers you chat, questions, polls, and people. So in the people tab, obviously, you can see who else is here with us today. If you use the questions area for any questions that you'd like to ask, we're going to have a Q&A session a little bit later on in the presentation. So as we get to that, please use that question area in there. The other really important area to think about is the polls area. And we're going to be running a number of polls over the course of the next hour to hear a little bit from the audience that we have here today. And I think we have a very good audience here today, a rich audience of varied people. So we want to hear from you about what you think. Just as a quick tester, let's launch that very first poll. You should see a little red dot come up on the polls side, and that first question there, really just to get you used to the polling technique in this particular platform, Livestorm. So the question is, what is your primary responsibility within your organization? We've broken out half a dozen different areas that you could answer for there. So if I can invite people to start voting for what that is, and we should be able to start seeing the results as they come through there. So I'm submitting my vote in there, and that means once I've submitted my vote, I start to see the results as they begin to develop, and it becomes a live thing. So that's that point there. The other thing I'm going to ask you to do is just spend a moment or two thinking about looking at the questions area. And what I want you to do is in the chat area, I beg your pardon. In the chat area, what I'd like you to do is just to let us know what part of the world you're based in. So give us country, perhaps city as well, if that's appropriate. What we'll do is a little bit later on in the webinar, we'll come back and give you a little bit of a flavour of where people are based. So those are the two main interaction tools that we're going to be using here today as we go through this webinar. So as I said, this is the agenda for today. I'm just going to spend a couple of moments doing this welcome and introductions, and then I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. And our first speaker, I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Pamela Hinds, who's taken time out of her schedule. It's about 8 o'clock in the morning in California, so thank you for joining us early, Pamela. Pamela is the Fortinet Founders Chair and the Professor of Management Science and Engineering at Stanford, and she has a really amazing body of work that she's continuing to develop, which we were just chatting about this before we started, actually looking particularly at the effect of the hybrid working world that we're finding ourselves in. Her interests have really sort of driven into the effects of technology on teams in terms of collaboration and how that works together. Really interesting sort of discussions around the culture, the language, identity, and how you resolve conflict in the emerging marketplace of work, the evolving world of work, and the changing nature of work, which is particularly relevant today as we get into this whole question of hybrid working, remote working, and on all those kinds of things. Pamela has a presentation which I'm looking forward to hearing, which again is going to have you answering some questions in the poll. Pamela, I'd like to hand over to you, and I look forward to hearing your talk.
Great, thank you so much, Mike. It is great to be here. I'm going to share a presentation here. All right, so what I'm going to be talking about in the time that I've got here today is some of the foundations of successful digital transformation. You know, what is it that organizations really need to do in order to really take advantage of the opportunities that digital technologies provide. It's really about the culture that is required in organizations that tend to be more successful at doing this. So first of all, what is digital transformation? There are a number of different perspectives out there, a number of different definitions. Here what we've got is starting with a definition from Salesforce. And I think this is an interesting definition because it's pretty all-encompassing. They argued that it's the process of using digital technologies to create new or modify existing business processes, culture, and customer experiences to meet changing business and market requirements. So quite broad and also somewhat modest in terms of the kind of change that is required in order for it to be considered a digital transformation. Westerman, who is a research scientist at MIT, in his book argues that it is a radical rethinking of how an organization uses technology, people, and processes to fundamentally change business performance. So this is a more ambitious definition, radical rethinking and fundamentally changing business performance. And I think that that tends to be the more common definition for digital transformation. And then Gartner, who has argued that it's exploiting digital technologies and supporting capabilities to create a robust new digital business model. So that's even more ambitious yet, to actually create new business models, new ways of offering our products and services through these digital technologies. Evidence from the World Economic Forum and others suggests that investing in new business models is actually the most difficult type of digital transformation to do, and the least targeted, probably in part because of that, but also in part because it really does require dramatic changes to the culture and the way of operating of organizations that embark upon this. So I also wanted to step back a little bit and talk about, what technologies we're talking about being involved in digital transformation. One way that people talk about this is that these are disruptive technologies. They're emerging technologies, they're digital, but they have a disruptive kind of flavor because they're dramatically changing the way that we do something within our businesses. And oftentimes AI gets a lot of the attention. We think about how AI is going to transform our businesses and is going to transform work. But it's really all of it. It is the Internet of Things. It is autonomous vehicles and drones, robotics, virtual and augmented reality, social media, big data, and so forth. And it's all of it coming together. Oftentimes, we're looking at multiple different kinds of emerging technologies that are being brought to bear for any given digital transformation. One of the questions that often comes up is, is this any different from past disruptions? Is it different from the Industrial Revolution or the introduction of PCs or cell phones and other mobile technologies? And I think that it is. And the reasons are because, one, the speed and velocity of change is just unprecedented. Things are happening very, very quickly. Krieger from the World Economic Forum said it took 75 years for 100 million people to get access to the telephone. The gaming app Pokemon Go hooked that many users in less than 1 month in 2016. I mean, it's just incredibly quick. Patents, the rate of patenting has also just dramatically increased. Between 2015 and 2017, it was a 54% increase in patenting. So the pace of change is really unprecedented and astounding. The other thing that's really key is that it is more holistic. If we look at, for example, the introduction of the PC, it was a technology. But I'm going to go back to the previous slide. We're really looking at these technologies that are intertwined, where almost every digital transformation is going to involve 3, 4, 5 of these different technologies. So for example, if we're looking at agricultural technologies, we might see, autonomous harvesters in the field, sensors that they are then interacting with, big data being collected through those autonomous vehicles that are in the fields. This might be transmitted over social media and so forth. So there's just example after example after example of these systems that are relying on many of these different technologies. So it's just more holistic. Also, there are vast amounts of readily available data and storage, and our ability to use computational methods to analyze this data. So that's another big change that, we've got all kinds of data on consumer behavior, how our products are being used, employee behaviors of the machines in our factories, and so forth. And then finally, flows of information. With social media in particular, we've got information that's flowing much more readily, often outside of the control of the organization. So this this information is much more fluid, and we have to be more responsive to it. So for example, customer videos that can go viral outside the control of the organization. So with that, I'm going to have you do a poll to get a sense of what your experience is of these disruptions. So can we launch the poll? There we go. So to what extent do you believe that digital technologies will disrupt your industry? Please submit your vote. Okay, looks like we've got most of our responses in. Oh, a little bit more. Wait just another second or two. Okay, well, it looks like most of you believe that it's going to be a major disruption. This is the results of a study that was done by Kane and his colleagues in a book that they published in 2019 on digital transformation. And as you can see, you're actually pretty consistent. About 87% anticipated a great, either a great or a moderate extent of disruption in their industries. So I think that continues to hold true, that we're going to see disruptions across a variety of industries. And one of the things that we read again and again and again is that it's the industries that don't expect the disruption that are likely to find themselves in trouble. Okay, so another poll for you. Let's launch this poll. I'd like you to respond to the statement: my organization is adequately preparing for disruptions projected to occur in my industry due to digital trends. Okay, we'll just wait another minute for those to come in. Okay, good. So it looks like many people feel like their organizations are preparing and are adequately prepared. Some aren't quite sure, some disagree. It looks like there's quite a bit of confidence out there, which is very encouraging. Again, this is the study that was done by Kane and his colleagues in 2019. And I should have said earlier, this is a survey of about 4,000 leaders and employees in a variety of industries. And what they found was that only about 44% either agreed or strongly agreed. So it looks like from the poll here, those of you who are participating are a little bit more confident that your organizations are prepared. All right. I just wanted to point out here that it really ranges by industry. High tech tends to be, more on top of things, not surprisingly, banking as well, because it's really been pushed in that industry. But, when you go down to pharmaceuticals, utilities, and so forth, the level of preparation is a little bit lower. All right, so now what does digital transformation or digital transforming look like? Well, one possibility is just increasing efficiencies within the organization. So for example, Siemens, a few years back, there was a write-up on them where they digitized a major electronics plant in Germany, and they got 75% of it automated, increased output by a factor of about 10, decreased defects, and increased speed. So that's example of using these new technologies to dramatically increase the efficiency of an organization. Another is to change the customer experience, really provide new kinds of products and services that change the way that customers engage with your organization. Marriott hotel chain is known for the efforts they're putting into digital transformation. And what they've done is they've tried to personalize the entire travel journey using extensive customer data that they're collecting. And even in some of their hotels, some AI-powered bots that interact with the customers. And this has resulted for them in an increase in customer loyalty and also market share. Digital transformation can also look like just doing business differently, changing the business models. And one of the hopes is that industries and organizations will be able to do that by disrupting from within instead of waiting for somebody like Uber or Airbnb to come and do that disruption from outside the organization. Another element that really characterizes digital transformation is continual innovation. This is an effort that is not, there's no end point. We can't stand still. It really requires a constant state of experimentation and innovation. And importantly, there's no end goal. It is dynamic. And that's why I've got up there, I don't think of it as digital transformation. I think of it as digital transforming. It's actually having an organization, having a culture that is prepared to constantly look for opportunities to transform what it is they're doing. All right, so one additional poll. From your perspective, what are the key success factors for digitally transforming? Okay, we'll just take another few seconds here. Okay, great. So we've got responses across the board here, and that's as it should be, because it turns out that all of these are actually really important to digitally transform. One of the things I want to point out, though, is that oftentimes what gets the most attention is access to digital talent and adequate technology infrastructure. And in fact, let's see, those are relatively low. Yep, adequate technology infrastructure is pretty low. Access to digital talent, mid-range. And those are, of course, really important. I mean, you have to have people who, know their way around these technologies, can help you develop them, build them out, and so forth. And having the architecture within your organization is also critically important. But oftentimes we over-rotate on those and forget about some of these more cultural elements, if you will. Having a clear vision and strategy, making sure that, we know where we are headed as an organization, and we are aligned in doing that. Having a digital culture that is agile, willing to take risks, and experiment. Having a nimble organizational structure. It turns out that is also really important to being able to be agile and take advantage of the opportunities as they come in. Also, a sense of urgency. That was rated, fairly low on your list, but it turns out that a sense of urgency is imperative. And organizations that have a higher sense of urgency tend to take more risks and mobilize more rapidly when these opportunities present themselves, which of course is critical given the speed of change that we've been talking about. And then also bold leadership is extremely important because we need to be able to have this clear vision. We need to be able to act rapidly when opportunities present themselves. So bold leaders who set an ambitious vision and model the changes that are required tend to lead their organizations more effectively into digital transformation. Okay, so one of the things that I hope you'll take away from my comments today is that it isn't as much about the technology as we might think that it is. I mean, again, the technology is absolutely crucial. None of this would be happening without the technology. But again and again, what organizations and scholars are finding is that it's not about the tools, but the ability to operate effectively in an environment dominated by those tools. I really like what Caitlin from McKinsey Quarterly says, while the technical capabilities are crucial, a strong and adaptive culture can help make up for the lack of them. So it's really important to make sure that, again, we've got the digital talent, we've got the technology, but not lose sight of how important it is to have this strong and adaptive culture as a foundation for digital transformation. So these are the results of a study that was done by Hartle and Hass a few years back. And what they did was they surveyed 25 people from industry, research, and consulting across a variety of industries. And all of these people had extensive experience, 9.5 years or more, in digital transformation. And they all held senior positions in their organization, CEO, CDO, and so forth. And what they did was they asked them, what are the factors that are necessary that really lay the groundwork for digital transformation? And the numbers that you see on here are the percentage of panelists who selected this item as one of the top 10 choices that they made. So as you can see, if we look through this, it's openness toward change, being customer-centric, willingness to learn, innovation, being agile, sharing knowledge, having a positive attitude toward failure, and also cooperating with one another. What underpins a lot of this is, this willingness to learn, this agility, and ability to innovate rapidly. So, one of the models that I've put together is kind of pulling together the research and what we know about digital transformation. At the center of it, I believe, is being customer-centric. So organizations that really focus on the customer experience, improving and moving with the times around what the customers want and expect, is really key. So we start with that, and then have capabilities around that, and a culture within the organization that supports our ability to help the customer in achieving what they want. And this often means new business models in order to serve the customer better. So then we have, in support of this, voracious learning. So really having an organization that focuses on learning new things, figuring out what might be possible, experimenting as a way of learning. So it's focused not so much on what people know, but what people can discover through processes within the organization. So rather than an expert kind of culture where we've got people who know and people who don't know, we're focused on having people who are really all about learning whatever it is they need to learn in a given moment. Another aspect is unbounded collaboration. Really working together with other people within the organization, but also outside of the bounds of the organization in order to move as swiftly as we need to and bring in the expertise that's required to solve some of these really complex problems. It's also important that the culture be one that has an appetite for risk. Really willing to take chances, try new things, again, experiment with new things in order to try things out, and very importantly, learn from that process and learn from any failures. So, an organization that really focuses on taking chances, but then learning from anything that goes wrong or perhaps even right. And then finally, being nimble and fast. And I've referred to that a couple of times over the course of my comments, but it's just really critical that organizations be able to move quickly to identify these opportunities and to act on these opportunities. And part of this is being able to, reorganize at a moment's notice in order to pull together the right people to take advantage of an opportunity. So with that, I'm just going to wrap up. The key points for today are that digital transforming is radical and ongoing. We have to rethink how we employ technology, people, and processes to fundamentally change how we're doing business and what the experience is of our customers. And if we have a culture, a foundation that supports that, we will be much more likely as organizations to be successful at identifying and taking advantage of these opportunities. So with that, I will turn it over to Mike.
Thank you, Pamela. That was fascinating and really interesting. Thank you so much for your comments. I'd like to remind everybody that any questions you may have, please make sure you put them into the question tabs. We'll have a little bit of time for Q&A as we get to the end of the webinar. But I've already got a few questions that I'm ready of my own to fire in response to that really interesting talk. Pamela, thank you so much.
Thank you.
The next stage in our webinar is we're now going to hear from Koichiro Kondo from Dentsu in Tokyo. Corey is actually going through the path that we've put together between Stanford and OpenClassrooms as a student. So he's just completing his first project at the moment, where he's learning about how to put a digital roadmap together to driving a transformation and to win support for that as we go through. And once he's spoken, I'm going to say a little bit more about my involvement from the OpenClassrooms perspective and how I mentor students and the work I've put into helping to put some of the Open Classroom side of the course together to address actually a lot of the issues that you've brought up. So it's been really interesting to see how well aligned. It's a relief to see how well aligned these things are. But I think the next thing to do is to move over to Corey's presentation. Corey is within the HR team. He's a senior management in the HR team. He'll introduce himself fully in his talk over at Dentsu. Dentsu is the 5th largest advertising agency group in the world. And Corey is based in headquarters over in Tokyo. So if we could now turn over to Corey, and thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Mike. So, hi everyone. Good morning, good evening. Today, I'm here to talk about Dentsu's journey through open classrooms during the COVID pandemic. So here's today's agenda. Start from my introduction. Then I will let you know the impact of the COVID in Japanese business landscape. And next, I will talk about the trial project with OC and some personal findings as a student as well. And finally, I will summarize my conclusion. So please let me introduce myself first. My name is Koichiro Kondo. I am HR data manager in Dentsu, and I am in charge of data-driven projects, including HR analytics and data expert training. Before my current role, I have developed my international experience in London and had a rich experience in data analytics and digital consultancy. Now I'm taking digital transformation lead path as a student at OC, and I will let you know my personal impressions about OC as a student as well. So this slide is about my company, Dentsu. So Dentsu is the world's fifth largest advertising agency network. We have a lot of different business entities such as CRM, creative boutique, data analytics, and of course, media agency as well. We operate in over 140 countries and have over 70,000 employees. So let's begin with the impact from the COVID-19 outbreak. So COVID-19 is definitely unprecedented catastrophe in our history. However, it's also a significant opportunity to change status quo. Let me explain the kind of background. So before COVID, Japan stood as the world's third largest economy, but Japan was really struggling with rapid changes by digital innovations. Please take a look at the left table. According to IMD, the MBA university, our digital competitiveness was ranked just 27th in the world. We were behind the UK, Germany, and France. Also looking at the growth and population of the cloud computing spending on the right diagram. Gartner classified us into the resisting countries as a kind of cloud computing development. So let me introduce 3 symbolic facts describing the Japanese hesitation to change. Firstly, cash is still king in payment in Japan. It's a symbol of the high credibility and trust in Japan. We could find many restaurants which don't accept credit card payment, even in the central Tokyo. Secondly, Japan is well known for skillful chefs and artisans, but their skill sets and techniques are totally black boxed. They rarely manualize their processes, and there is no proper training programs. Thirdly, as you may already know, we are the most rapidly aging society. 30% of the population is already over 60 years old, and this proportion will increase in the next 10 years. These 3 things are kind of typical and symbolic consequences that we tend to be conservative and hesitate to change ourselves. But as I mentioned in the previous slide, COVID triggered and accelerated digital disruption in Japan. For example, the penetration of mobile payment rocketed after COVID because people preferred the contactless payment. This phenomenon contributed to not only the growth of the cashless payment, but also the disruption of the traditional financial services. Secondly, we potentially become the leading country where AI succeeds all the human legacy skill sets. For example, Dentsu, our company, developed the artificial intelligence to gauge the quality of tuna with image recognition technique. Finally, let me introduce how COVID changed our work style. Before COVID, Japanese enterprises rarely allowed their employees to work from home. However, after COVID, they changed the company's policy drastically. For example, Zoom announced Japan is the fastest growing market in Asia in 2020. In order to leverage this precious opportunity, we need to overcome some Japanese specific human resource issues as well. So our society has strong lifetime employment culture and low labor flexibility. So unlike Western countries, replacing employees with newcomers by mass layoffs, it doesn't work in Japan. We train existing employees and transform them into new workforce are vital for Japanese company. So then let me move on to talking about how Dentsu tackle this challenge. Firstly, we need to retrain experienced advertising employees into a new field leaders. That's a digital transformation experts. Secondly, even in the midst of pandemic, we need to nurture global leaders. Then we need to fully leverage online programs and give them opportunities to collaborate with international talents. Thirdly, as I said, Japanese society is the most aging society. Then people will have to retire later and update their knowledge and skill sets constantly. So the company needs to empower employees' continuous and lifelong learning. So now I'd like to talk about proof of concept project in OpenClassrooms and why we chose OpenClassrooms. OpenClassrooms is a suitable program and platform to motivate our employees to refresh their skill sets and equip them with the constant learning motivation. We sent 100 global employees to Spark program, which contains accessibility to unlimited video lectures. Also, 20 Japanese managers joined Pivot program, which is more intensive and tailored ones, and it contains individualized mentorship and accessibility to additional resources such as contents at Stanford University. Compared to other MOOC program, the completion rate of OC is significantly higher than other MOOCs. Also, most attendees spent over 10 hours per week and completed multiple courses. These facts support our hypothesis that OC can be the best platform to transform our employees into a new workforce. Also, we did further assessment for Pivot program. We checked the level of the confidence in skill sets for digital transformation projects by the pre-course and post-course surveys. There are 4 different skill sets: analyze data, implement a strategy, establish data-driven culture, and design roadmap. We measure the kind of lift before the open classroom and after the open classroom. Analyzing and road mapping skill sets showed over 50% lift in individual confidence level. Moreover, we didn't expect the lift in the strategy implement and the culture establishment because they require sophisticated soft skills. However, they performed very well. Then we interviewed students to find out deeper insight about the OC experience. One manager who started his career at TV advert section, he was not confident about his digital skill sets. However, through OC, he gained fundamental digital literacy and started constructive discussion with clients. Secondly, we figured out that OC energized our employees to nurture international leadership and communication skill sets under COVID situation. This person worried about his English skill before class, but after open classrooms, he learned not only English, but also how to share his opinion proactively and facilitate productive discussion. I think I've covered all the kind of assessment of OC as an HR manager. So now I want to move on to my personal opinion. So as I said, I'm taking the digital transformation path on OC, and I'm just about to complete the first project. And let me let you know my personal opinion about OC from now. So firstly, I was really impressed with the realistic story as a case study. In my first project, students need to transform a traditional traveling agency into a new profitable business. To innovate them, students created a lot of decks to energize people and wrote some confidential emails to get alignment. As you can see, I need to persuade key stakeholders with different communication strategies based on how supportive they are. In my experience, stakeholders are not necessarily supporting you in the actual digital transformation project. So we need to be extremely careful about how to involve opponents into the project. So these realistic scenarios will expand the students' imagination and give them a more practical experience. Secondly, so OC designed the effective combination between learning and practicing. If you want to equip yourself with new skill sets or the frameworks, reading and watching are not enough. I think you need to practice these frameworks, applying them into the actual business cases and explaining them in your own words are vital for equipping yourself with new skill sets. In OC, we need to create a lot of deliverables and discuss applicable cases with mentors. These experiences make your learning truly practical skill sets. And through OC, I realized the power of collaborative discussion with diverse members. My mentor is French, so we discuss a lot about local innovation in Europe and Asia, respectively. The program at Stanford introduced global case study, and we can easily identify globally consistent theories in digital innovation. Through these diverse information, I can realize where we should globalize and localize in digital transformation. That brings us to the end of my presentation. Here's a summary of today's presentation. I talked through 3 points. So my company's challenge, the value of open classrooms as a company, HR, and as individual student. Thank you for listening. It was a pleasure being here today.
Thank you very much, Corey, and thank you for your words about not just the personal experience that you've had with the course so far, but also the background on Dentsu and the challenges that are faced in the Japanese market. It's one of the things that I found really fascinating working with students through this path. I should introduce myself a little bit. My background is I started my first digital transformation back in 1997, when, to be honest, we didn't call it a digital transformation, but that's exactly what it was. I was working for a newspaper company, Associated Newspapers, publishers of the Daily Mail. And at the time, we went from a newspaper that was turning over about £100 million in advertising and entered an industry that was worth about £4 million across the whole of the UK to set up our first digital publishing operation under the name of Associated New Media. And since then, I've set up and run a data science consultancy, and I've written a book about how we reimagine business in the wake of everything that's happened in the last 18 months, drawing on my experience over the last 20 or so years. I've been involved with Open Classrooms for about 2 years now, and I helped to create the path that we offer as the digital transformation path. And I now mentor a number of the students from Dentsu and from elsewhere as they learn about the different pieces of digital transformation. What I'm going to do is just share a couple of thoughts around that that I think are worth just highlighting to show, and hopefully this is going to work on my screen, to show just exactly what it is that we cover during the course that we put together. And I want to start off with the observation about what Satya Nadella spoke about as he started his earnings call about a year ago now, where he talked about the impact that the COVID emergency had on Microsoft's business. And this quote here that we've seen around about 2 years worth of digital transformation in the space of 2 months was met with a wide range of nods and sage agreement. I think that's a really important point here, though. And if you think about a lot of the things that Pamela was talking about earlier on, digital transformation is not about taking the things that we used to do manually, face-to-face or whatever, and effectively Zoomifying what we do. That's not a transformation. That's simply a digitalization of existing process. Digital transformation is about unlocking new value, particularly new value as far as the customer is concerned. It's a customer-centric approach to really figuring out what we can do differently because that technology exists, how we can change the way our organization operates to better provide that. And so whilst I applaud what Satya Nadella was talking about here, and there's certainly been an increased impetus towards digital transformation, it's not enough just to put technology in place. And that's really where we see the things that reflect in the 5 projects that form the digital transformation path that we run through OpenClassrooms in partnership with Stanford. It's really looking at that digital transformation skill gap. Now, again, Pamela mentioned earlier on, part of that skill gap is around the technologists and the architecture that lead through, but it's as much about the human side of it, the cultural side of transformation that we need to make sure that we're getting right as well. That skill gap exists at the very most senior level of the organization. It exists from the board right down through every level within the organization. And that's really what the path is designed to try and address. So there are 5 projects in here. I've just given you a snapshot of what they're all about, but they each focus on a slightly different element of what digital transformation is. The first project, which is the one that Corey was just completing as he spoke to us, is around Business Travel Experts, which is a fictional company, but they are seeing a decline in their revenue because they're being digitally disrupted. So the first project is about how do you actually get your transformation program designed, how do you get that roadmap set up, and how do you sell it in to the leadership team and to the board. So that's the first stage of a transformation program. In the second project, we turn to a TV station targeting teenagers, and we ask students to work on redefining the business model, which goes to the heart, I think, of what Pamela described as being the more complex end of the digital transformation spectrum, if you like. So they're moving from being simply a broadcast TV station into setting up as a platform, much as the latest digital players are who are disrupting their industry. From there, we then spend a little bit of time focusing on data skills, understanding how to present data, how to use data to make decisions based on what we see there, and learning a little bit about how that works. It's a bit like a finance for non-finance managers course. We're not trying to teach people to become data scientists, but to be able to use discernment when looking at data and understand the decisions that are made and the sacrifices that are made when a data presentation is made. That then takes us to project 4, and that's around a fashion company who are looking at using AI to revolutionize their online business. So that's really focusing at the technology side of it. We do need to talk about the technology part of the digital transformation, and that's where that lasts. And then we round off with the final, if you like, the bit where the rubber hits the road on a digital transformation, which is persuading all of the people in your organization to get in behind that change that's taking place. And we use the shipping industry, which is, on the one hand, a really traditional and manual way of doing things, but which has been very much disrupted by the changing world of digital disruption. And so how is a company like Asia Shipping going to respond to that, to bring all of the people, the 800 people within the organization together to support this transformation that's in place, and to really create that culture of continuous innovation. Because again, referring back to Pamela, a digital transformation isn't a program with a start date and a stop date that you then tick the box and say we've done it. It's the beginning of a continuous openness to innovation, change, and redesign the way you do things. And I think there's never been a more important time than now to do that. So with that in mind, I'm going to stop my my screen share, come back onto the main camera. I'm going to invite Pamela to do the same thing. I'd like to remind everybody in the audience that we're ready for questions that that you may have in response to the things that we've seen today, or something that you may be seeing in your industry at the moment. Pamela, just to start us off, the pandemic strangely has come up once or twice during the course of the discussion, and yeah. I saw quite a difference in the figures that you presented pre-pandemic on readiness and willingness for transformation to take place.
Yeah,
and we saw something quite different from our audience. And I just wonder, is that what's happening there? Is it a change of risk profile, or what do you think's behind that, and what do we do about it?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I don't know why it was different. It may be that the people who are attending today are in organizations that are readier than those who are not attending. But it could also be a geographic effect, where there are some places in the world where companies are more prepared than others. But it also could very well be that the pandemic has been a major inflection point in terms of pressures from customers. I mean, nobody could go into businesses to do anything, right? So we had to do all of our banking from home. We had to get most of our food through delivery services. There was more reliance on on digital means for getting the products and services that we required. So it may be that that this inflection has forced organizations to rethink the way that they're delivering their products and services, and in part, because of just general pressures of digital transformation and the evolving technologies, but also the assumption that things will never go back to the way that they were pre-pandemic, that expectations of employees and customers have changed, and we need to step up to that.
Thank you. I think that makes a lot of sense. What does that do in terms of the senior leadership group? How critical is it that senior leaders all have confidence and frankly competence when it comes to digital transformation? I mean, is it just the role of the CIO or the CDO, or is it the whole senior team that needs to be involved?
No, I think most of the evidence suggests that the leadership is absolutely crucial, and it's in part because it touches every part of the organization. You have to have a clear vision for where it is you're going. You have to have an organization that is that is agile and can where groups can gather and reconvene as needed. And unless you've got support and a vision at the highest level of leadership, I think it's really difficult to be as agile and as risk-seeking as is required to do this. And I don't know what's happened during the pandemic in terms of senior leadership and their view of digital transformation. But based on my experience talking with various leaders, this was a shock, and there's recognition that we need to rethink the way that we are doing business. We need to rethink the way that we are managing employees, the way that we are interacting with our customers, and so forth. So, it might have been the wake-up call that was necessary.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of talk about the length of time that a company can operate at the top of its game, having reduced over the course of the 20th, early 21st century. Do you think that the process of digital transformation is something that helps companies to extend that longevity?
I do, if what we're talking about is digital transforming and not some end goal. I think there's an issue if there is a digital transformation and then an organization says, okay, good, we've got this now, we're going to be good for another 10 years. I just don't think that works anymore because somebody else is going to come in next year with a better idea. So, if an organization has really adopted more of a transforming kind of culture, then yes, I think it will help organizations stay at the top of their game.
I wonder how that fits. Another question that's come from the audience is quite an interesting one in the context of digital transformation. How do you advise organizations about wise use of capital? And they've couched this in terms of, do you treat the transformation as being a capital expenditure or an operational expenditure approach?
I think that depends a lot on the industry.
Yeah.
In some cases, I think it's always going to be largely operational. But in some cases, it will also have a very significant capital component to it, particularly for organizations that are, working with any kind of material goods, products, services.
It was interesting seeing in the research that you showed that the number of people who felt that there would be no effect of digital transformation was something like 3%.
Yeah.
Are the 3% kidding themselves, or are there still businesses out there that won't be affected by disruption from technology in this way?
Everything that I have seen and read suggests that nobody is immune. Who would have thought that the taxi industry would have been completely upended by the likes of Uber and other ride-sharing services? I think oftentimes these disruptions are going to come from places that we just don't anticipate, which is why they're able to have the foothold that they do.
One question that's come up, which I think is an interesting one. You've talked about the transformation being a continuous long-term process. One of our audience members has asked, do we need to focus on some small wins first? Suggested VR as a place to focus on. Are there any particular places that you'd go looking for those quick wins?
Yeah. Oh, small wins are so important in any kind of change effort or transformation effort, like digital transformation, for a variety of reasons. One is small wins enable you to build confidence in the organization that what you're doing makes sense. So it's a way of experimenting. But it also, allows you to see change over time. Where it can take so long to have a huge transformation program that has many, many different elements, and you can sort of miss the opportunity as a result of doing that. Whereas, if you focus on the small wins, it can be very powerful. I think the place for the small wins is, obviously you want the focus on any efforts to be the highest leverage opportunities where you're going to be able to see, the most important changes for the business. But at the same time, you also want the small wins to happen in a part of your organization that is ripe for doing this, that actually has the digital culture that we talked about earlier, so that they can in fact be successful. I would say probably the ability to be successful in these small wins is more important than the impact of what it is that is being done, because it's we have to see the wins.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's familiar to me. I remember starting a couple of years ago on a good couple of years ago on a transformation project, and saying to the chairman, "It's going to take us 2 years before we really see any benefit." And I bumped into him in the corridor about 3 weeks later, and he said, "So what have you got to show for me?" And it's like, "Well, I've got this," because I kind of foresaw it was going to happen. But it's amazing how, however well you structure expectations, this is a long-term thing that's going to pay back over time. People still want that immediacy to show that they've made the right decision, don't they?
Right, right. Well, and things change so quickly in our environment these days that if we're planning something for 2, 3, 5 years out, who knows what the world's going to be like in 5 years, right?
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so having something that builds but allows for more immediate successes, I think is really key.
And speaking of immediate successes, I noticed that the time has ticked past the hour.
Yes.
So, Pamela, I'd like to thank you very, very much on behalf of our audience, on behalf of Open Classrooms, and on behalf of Dentsu. I also like to thank Corey for his time today. We're going to wrap this webinar up now. Please, anybody who wants to keep talking, please continue talking in the chat area. But Pamela, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. It's been great to be here, and I appreciate the invitation.
Thank you very much.
Talk later.
All right. Look forward
Thanks.
to it. Thanks.